had a dream. My country was free, firmly standing on her own 2 feet, with grace and dignity. It's the land where I am from, conjures visions of unicorns. Their beauty takes a unique form of the worldly, and yet she needs at last to come together and to raise her voice. There are ties that must be severed to rise above the noise. Seize the day, seize the day, seize the day. All your hopes and dreams will surely fade away if you don't seize the day, seize the day.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to another Matters, our 15th episode with myself, Martin Day, MP for Linlithgow and East Falkirk, and John McNally, MP for Falkirk. It's been a few months since we last did a show live from the bowels of Westminster, but we're here today. And we might have the madness that we've had on a few previous occasions, because we were expecting votes tonight at 10 p.m. And then because of the travel difficulties following the storm, there would be fewer people in Parliament, so they thought votes might be 9 o'clock, and now we think they might come earlier. So John and I may have to get up and run, but just continue watching, continue asking questions, because our guest will be live online. And we also have in the studio with us today Bert McClelland, who's been on before and is also a first-generation Native American. Well, actual American, I suppose, different connotation. But so we should have a very interesting discussion tonight with John Rowley from Counterpoint Messaging. We will just bring John Counterpoint onto the screen. Hello, John. Nice to meet you, and thank you for joining us here tonight.
Absolutely. I'm glad you could squeeze us in before some voting.
Yes, and it's going to be a very interesting topic. The American elections. It's one of the only world superpower, and we're all very interested in what happens there because it impacts us all over the globe. I should have said at the start there, we introduced the show with a song from Kirsty Heggie, who is one of our local folk musicians, I would describe her as, but she does sort of all sorts of genre music. That's a song that she recorded for the show. And it's just worth saying that our latest album was released at the end or the start of December. She had an album launch in Linlithgow, an album called Aria, which she's done along with acoustic artist John Coletta. And it is an absolutely fantastic album. If anyone wants to look it up and order it online or download it, it's very well worth doing. I've got a copy of the CD and I've been playing it in the car, driving around the constituency. Great selection of tracks, really, really good. So I think it's worth giving her a wee shout out for the support she's given our show on this channel. So we're really pleased to have yourself with us, John. Would you like to tell the public a wee bit about your own background, and then we will start taking questions once the discussion goes as well. So there may be some questions that appear on screen from the audience that are live. And there are already comments coming in, so I'm going to start looking for the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So my professional experience outside of politics is scant, but I worked in television and radio as a very young person. And then really since I've been in my very, very early 20s, I've had a company in the United States that's done political consulting, in particular advertising. We're kind of the equivalent of a politically focused advertising agency, which the way your elections are funded and orchestrated, it's probably a little bit of a like watching World Wrestling or something when you watch our elections with all the attack ads and how much money we spend and things like that. But I'm a political consultant on the Democratic side, and we've probably worked on somewhere between 550 and 600 different political campaigns, from the presidential level down to the, city council, township level, all over the United States.
Yeah, brilliant. So that's quite a pedigree for the elections. So that's really good to have you with us. There's John and Bert, who's with us in the studio as well. So we've all, of course, been watching. Well, I suppose with some amazement that Trump is still considered a contender. I mean, from where I'm sitting, we just thought he was, mad and highly dangerous, and we couldn't believe that he's still a credible option for the Republican Party to pick. And I suppose we've watched the news here that we heard this morning that one of the other Republican challengers, Ron DeSantis, is now withdrawn and supporting Trump. So where does that leave the Republican race?
I mean, you need like a cataclysmic event to slow him down at this point. I mean, he won the Iowa primary. It probably would get even more play, but everyone expected him to win it big, but he won it by as big a margin as anyone's ever done. New Hampshire looks like it'll be closer. Even if it's really close, I still don't know that will leave Nikki Haley, the main alternative left, with enough money, even though her home state is one of the next states. I mean, in presidential politics from the 1940s until the 21st century, you could do well in your home state at least, and that would make you a little more credible. But Trump kind of ended the presidential aspirations of Marco Rubio in Florida, and she's 20 points behind in South Carolina. And you almost have to turn some thinking on its head to really understand what's going on with the Trump phenomenon and the Republican Party. I'm hazy if it's Socrates or Aristotle, know thyself. Well, I think the problem is everybody is thinking about their own point of view, the media, non-Republican primary voters, when they look at Trump. If you really study who Republican primary voters are, this is like 8 to 11% of Americans. This is a very narrow set of people who are driving a lot of the American political discussion. And these folks are old, they're angry, they're by and large white, and they don't like, I'm not going to say don't like, they hate Muslims, liberals, immigrants. And so anyone that puts their wind in the sail, that puts their wind up and sail in the wind to catch that sort of animus does pretty well. And that's kind of been part of Trump's secret from day one. And it's why some of these reasonable Republicans, the closer they get to running, even some that you kind of feel like older school, more moderate Republicans, as they have to appeal to that very angry, hateful electorate, they have to say things that just put them out of touch with everybody else. And it's just been very hard. The other reason Trump's had such a hold on the party is, that there's never been just a one-on-one race. In 2016, there were 15 candidates. And I guess he's finally getting to that. But if all of the more reasonable non-Trump Republicans have been able to get together, so it was a one-on-one choice, there might have been a better chance to beat him. But he's then the other thing that your listeners may appreciate or may not is all of the prosecutions of him. His momentum had faded, and then as these court cases, where they're criminally and civilly, they all kind of hit at the same time last year. And it just re-galvanized the right wing in the United States of the Republican primary voters. What that's going to mean in the general election is a whole other topic. But anyway.
Yeah, no, that's very, very interesting. We have a system here in the UK Parliament for selecting select committee chairs, and they divvy up the committee chairs between the different parties. And there can be an open contest from rival candidates from a particular party, and we all get entitled to a vote to pick who gets the chair. And we have this sort of, I would call it the opposition dilemma, in that you think, do you pick the sane, most sensible person so that we can all work with them better? Or do you pick the raving nutter in the hope that they damage the governing party more? And I suppose that's what I'm looking at it from outside. Is that what a Trump candidacy means in America? Is that actually better for the Democrats when the time comes to the actual general election?
Well, this is where you almost have to put the heading on this part of the conversation: the schizophrenia of American politics. Because I'm gonna say what American political consultants don't say very often is like I'm just not sure, because the argument, the bad news argument for Democrats, and I would argue democracy, is that for the first time in the entire time Trump has been running, there are some key states he has to win, swing states, that he has above 50% of polling right now. He's never gotten near, even when he performed at his best, he's never gotten anywhere near 50% in the polls. And so to me, that's just an alarming bad sign. Now, on the Democratic side of things, ever since Roe versus Wade was overturned and the Democrats have tried to make abortion pretty much their number one and number two issue for the last 2 or 3 years, we've won about every competitive election. And so in 22 was better than expected. 23, about every competitive election we won. So we're also just moving into an era of that confounds political scientists, political consultants, and pollsters, because it used to be, if your negatives were as high as Trump's, there was zero chance you would win. If your negatives were as high as where Biden's are, there's zero chance. And so now you have two people that in 10 to 20 years ago, you look at them statistically, they're unelectable, and they're on this collision course.
Yeah, no, thanks. I'm going to bring John in. I know you've got some questions as well.
Thanks very much, Martin and Bert. I was just listening at the weekend there to some of the broadcasters on the World Service talking about the impact that Trump has. And all the commentators say that he has some sort of hold over the electorate. But I perceive him as a predator. He certainly comes across as a predator. And there's a little phrase I heard years ago. He comes across as a hooded crow masquerading as a peacock, and I think he does think he is a peacock. But what is it about him that we can see through him, and that he seems to, convince everybody that he's such a credible person, and the majority of people in America seem to tolerate him for one reason or another. And then following on from that, is Frank Luntz involved in this in any way? The Republican advisor pollster, because he's spending an awful lot of time over here at the moment, Frank Luntz, working with the Tory party. And I just wonder if you have any comments on any of those two things about Trump's hold and the Frank Luntz situation.
Yeah, and has there been talk that he's listening more to Luntz now?
It's odd.
Because Luntz is kind of seen as a contrarian. He's actually been on TV talking about how Trump refuses to listen to him. I think the two important things to keep in mind about Trump is also, it's not just that he's this spellbinding, charismatic, hypnotic, whatever sort of mystical, persuasive power you want to give him. Two important things. The reason he's successful and the reason he won in 2016 is, one of the most important things in American politics, and I would imagine in about any country, is, do people feel like things are headed in the right direction or not? And so if people think things are off track, wrong direction, then that's going to be a change environment. It's one of the most elemental things about politics. And no matter what happened in 2016, Hillary Clinton did not represent change. And no matter how much you disliked him, he represented change. And so that water you're flowing in, that headwind or tailwind you have, is so powerful in American politics. So that's now working against the president, Biden, because people still don't think things are going well. So that's now kind of the it's on the other foot. The other thing about Trump is a lot of his appeal is not people's connection to him, but there's a politician in the United States who isn't that famous even here, but he said, you don't have to love what I love, you just have to hate what I hate. And so he's kind of the voice of a lot of the animus that gets stirred up in our news media and social media and the conservative media culture that we have over here, which is extraordinarily effective. And so he is kind of the voice of quote unquote owning libs, or sticking it to the Democrats, or sticking it to people of color or immigrants. And so, there are huge percentages of people that don't have a personal connection to him and don't personally like him and even some of his policies, but he hates what they hate. And so that puts them in the same kind of tribal camp.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. I'm just looking on our scroll to see if we've got any questions from our live audience.
As you're looking, I mean, I think I agree with everything that you said there, John. For the benefit of the UK audience, to give you a picture of the Republican Party primary electorate, as I understand it, when you think about the Republican Party, 35 to 40% of the Republican Party you can think of as being in a cult. These are hard MAGA people. These are the people of whom, as Trump said himself, if he walked out on the street and shot someone, they would not mind. For them, he is one of my favorite podcasters in America, who is an ex-Republican himself, describes Trump as the Orange God King. And for these people, Trump is that. There are a genuine number of folks in the United States who believe that Trump is a flawed figure like Cyrus from the Bible, who has been sent by God Almighty to save America from the godless hordes, that being us. And I don't mean to defame, talk down to religious voters there, by the way. I'm a practicing Christian, but that is how a lot of people feel. Then there is another chunk of the party, another 30%, who are soft MAGA or former staunch Tea Party supporters. So these were people these are more like the general European far right, like you see in France or UKIP here, or they're not full-blown Trump cultists in the same way, but they do believe in his reactionary, racist, radical right-wing ideology. And then you've got really, in terms of reasonable voters in the party, you're talking about a 5% on the fringe. These are the people who are thinking about voting for Chris Christie. And then between the 5% who are never Trump and the 30% soft MAGA, there's some 20% who are old, former, foreign policy hawks or Chamber of Commerce types. But just to emphasize the point that John was making about the need to turn everything you naturally think about the way politics works on its head to understand this. The rocket fuel that allowed Donald Trump to soar off into the stratosphere of polling and leave the other candidates behind in the dust was his getting criminally indicted by several different authorities. First, for bribing a porn star with whom he had an extramarital affair to keep quiet about it during an election. This is from the Family Values Party. And then for stealing highly classified national security information and flashing it around a golf club. And then for participating in a violent insurrection that attempted to destroy the American Republic. And this was what made him more popular within the Republican primary. In fact, so much more popular that none of his opponents could pose a viable challenge anymore. It is the first heresy in the Republican Party is to say that Trump is bad. You can make an argument that maybe we should move on from him, but if you say that Trump as Trump is a bad thing, what you're really doing, I think, in the modern Republican Party is saying that those liberals who we all know we can't stand for one reason or another have been right all along. So you can't say that he's bad, because that's to say that they were right
That's
about
confirming.
Exactly. So what that meant was his challengers, wormish cowards that they were, DeSantis and Haley and the rest of them, when they were asked for their response to Donald Trump being indicted, they had to say, "Oh, I think it's a travesty, and I support him." Well, if you think if he is a great former president, as you have to say he was, who's being unjustly persecuted, as you have to say he is, then why on earth should we support you as opposed to him? So
one piece of data that kind of complements this conversation is 15 to 20 years ago, there were a third or about 31% of American voters split their ticket, meaning they voted for a Democrat or a Republican somewhere in the ticket. These days, it's down to about 11. So that means the number of people who will cross party lines is down from 30% to 10%. And so that, it's easy to say balkanized or tribalization of politics. That's kind of it's an ossification of partisanship is somewhat what's happened. And it's why, whether it's in a primary or general, because the big challenge is you can't, when we do a lot of primary elections and general elections in the United States, we used to spend a lot of resources converting Republicans. We would win seats in 20% Republican advantage seats sometimes in the most conservative parts of the United States. Those folks chance you have these days is to get them to not vote because they just can't vote for a Democrat because of whether it's the Trump effect, the right-wing media, social media effect. They just can't hold their nose and vote for any Democrat.
And to answer your question earlier, Martin, about do you root for the reasonable candidate in the hopes you can work with them, or do you root for the nutter in the hopes that you can beat them? On the face of it, you would be, and I think a lot of us are tempted sometimes to hope that Trump wins the Republican nomination because he's so much more beatable than Nikki Haley, who would also be an egregious president. But because of the partisanship that John was just alluding to, you have a situation now where 90% of the country is either going to vote Democratic or Republican, no matter what happens, because the parties are so far apart that to jump ticket would mean to go against virtually everything you stand for. And because of the Electoral College, anyone who gets the nomination of either one of the two main parties has something like 50% chance of winning the White House. So whereas in the United Kingdom, I think a lot of conservatives, for instance, celebrated when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party because they thought, yeah, we hate everything he stands for.
Yeah, seen him as a weakness.
Exactly. He's clearly weak. He can't win like that. It's difficult in America for us to take that approach with Trump because it doesn't matter how crazy he is. He has a very, very high floor. Yeah. So
is it true to say then that, Trump, John, could win the outright nomination within the next couple of states, and that's him got a clear run at it without anybody to interfere with his progress?
It's, the nomination, it's going to have to be an astronomical event for him not to have the nomination now. The momentum is set, and if she could, even if she wins her home state, Nikki Haley. So, and that maybe that will be a good part of beating him, that he has that there's a longer run. He's definitely shown some mental lapses recently where he confused Nikki Haley with Pelosi. And, I'm a Democrat, but I'm also frustrated with Democrats too. And I'm kind of a contrarian in the party. I don't know how two guys that are about the same age run against each other, and everybody thinks Biden's too old in the United States, but Trump's not. And so I think a key part of what's got to happen is that he has to just be defined as just unstable. In addition to, I think the other thing that could be interesting in this race is, they're both old and they're both going to have embarrassing things happen because of that. So if we can just break even on that, let's then make it about that he's too unstable. And then the other thing about Trump is there's nobody around him. The problem with being you can call him a lone wolf or you can call him kind of a dictator, But I mean, he's not going to have a team around him. He barely put a government together last time, and it was all with third and fourth string people. And so I think Biden may have an opportunity to run as he's more stable than Trump, and he's got a competent team around him. Whereas Trump, it's just going to be up to his whims and animal instincts.
Mm-hmm.
To your question, John, about, is it possible that he could sew this up in the next couple of states? Honestly, I think the nomination is Trump's now already. I don't think there's anything short of, in American politics, we sometimes refer to the cheeseburger from heaven that finally takes him out, because Trump has a famously unhealthy diet. He's not a young man. He could die.
Cheeseburger from heaven.
Yeah, he could die. But
have you seen my diet here?
He doesn't slow.
Arnold Schwarzenegger compared to.
But you're saying that, but yet Biden's Secretary of State of Defense was it? I mean, he had some sort of operation in his heart, was it? But he never told the president.
Let's not focus on that.
Department of
Defense.
Defense Secretary. Yeah.
Doesn't look like the best organization.
No, well, we just sort of have to hope that was a one-off. Yeah, I mean, by all accounts, he didn't let the White House found out at around the same time that the rest of us did that he was going under the knife.
We've started to get a couple of questions coming in. So just before I take the first question, we've had a comment from Margaret Delaney, who said that no comments are available on YouTube. I can only apologise for that, and we'll try and have a look at that after the show to make sure the next one it works. We had this
Margaret.
Margot. I am having to read the screen here a wee bit further away than normal. So I'll just take that one off. So first question we've got, I'll just put it up on screen so folk can see it. Daniel Wodge saying, should Biden have replaced Harris for VP? Anyone have a thought on that one, Bert? Do you have any?
That's a hot
John?
topic. Well, I mean, in my judgment, no, because it is there's a couple reasons. I don't think we have much history of Americans voting based on who the vice president has. Mm-hmm. Some of the weakest vice presidents in the history of the country, they've still been on winning tickets, and some of the strongest ones, you could argue, didn't lift up a weak ticket. So I don't know that I think it would have probably caused more harm than good. And so, I mean, there's lots of opinions about how good of a job she's doing. No vice president is usually crushing it. And I also just think the fact that you've got the first African-American and woman, there's no booting her from the ticket. Like, even if she volunteered to go for the good of the party, if she genuinely thought that was it, I think you'd have a huge segment of liberals and women and African-Americans who would always think she was booted. And I think it would create more internal. We already have enthusiasm problems. I think it might create even more. And it's also the old question of, if you replace somebody, whether it's a job in one of your offices at Parliament or on a campaign or in an administration, with who? I mean, I don't know that we had somebody waiting in the wings. Some of the strongest Democrats who probably could have challenged the president are, for a lot of different reasons, it's not perfect timing for them to have challenged him or even kind of jump into the VP sweepstakes.
Do y'all have to go for it?
We're watching the screens here, and the summing up has started in the debate, but it's the opposition that are speaking just now, and there's a government minister that speaks. So we've probably got at least 15, 20 minutes, I would hope. John may leave slightly earlier.
Yeah, because I'm slower than you.
We've got a few more questions coming in. Wind-ups have started. Votes shortly is what I'm being told by our whip. So yeah.
Just on this vice presidential point, I mean, to give it's a very good question, because Kamala Harris is even less popular than Joe Biden is. But to give you context, the last time a vice president was replaced, a sitting vice president was replaced on a national ticket, was 1944. And that was for similar reasons. Basically, folks thought the vice president was a little too unpopular. But I don't think that was a functional option to replace Harris on the ticket. I think I was of the opinion at the time, and I still think he probably shouldn't have picked her for vice president. I think there were other better options. I think she's a bit analogous to Joe Swinson, in UK politics. In that she seemed really good for the benefit of Mr. Rowley. That was the former leader of the Liberal Democrat Party over here. Good night, John. Yeah, I mean, I think she seemed great on paper, and there wasn't quite the political space to discuss some of her potential flaws. So I hear where you're coming from, Margot, but I just that was not a realistic possibility.
For history buffs, that was a significant replacement. Henry Wallace was taken off the ticket for Harry Truman, and so.
Yeah. So just before we take the next question, I've stuck a comment up on screen I thought Bert might like to see. Paul says it's great to see Bert back on the show. Well, there you go. Oh. Neither John or I get these comments, so that's good that.
Well, y'all are never off the show.
Well, that's true. Yes. So that's good to know. See a couple of questions coming in. Charles Smith has said, "What's the panel's view of the responsibility of the media in producing the current political situation?" I should perhaps make an editorial comment here for the benefit of our guests, and that the Scottish political situation is such that there is only one newspaper that supports the pro-independence side. So our media is heavily skewed against us. And I suspect that kind of colouring may be influencing the question. It may not be, but just to put that in a context. So hopefully that is helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think the media definitely has a responsibility. I mean, I don't know if there's a partisan angle to that, but I mean, the media they're just weak right now. I mean, they're weakened financially. And so that means the quality of people staying in journalism, and just, a lot of the economics of the news media, at least in terms of quality coverage, is down. I mean, the biggest thing is, in 2016, when Trump ran, they just covered him due to the ratings it was getting. They just gave him a lot of love letter coverage for all of the American conservative angst about, the quote unquote liberal media. I mean, CNN and others Bernie Sanders would be speaking. They'd cut away from him to see an empty podium of a Trump rally about to start. And probably the biggest thing is just the effectiveness of the conservative media echo chamber, which is newspapers, talk radio, Fox News, Newsmax, and honestly, just how rank and file conservatives use social media and email independent of any sort of corporate heading. I mean, all of that, I would put all of that in there as kind of the gumbo mix that really has created a poisonous environment.
Yeah. I think particularly when it comes to Trump, I think that much of the media that isn't actively in the tank for Donald Trump now is, at least I imagine behind the scenes, fairly opposed to him. But I think they bear a tremendous amount of responsibility for putting him there in the first place. There have been studies done which suggest that the media, in their coverage in the 2016 presidential election, in the primary and in the general, gave Trump what amounted to something like $1 billion in free advertising by constantly. Yeah, and in a way that wouldn't be possible in a British context, because of the way British media is regulated. You have to give a certain amount of time to all the major candidates who are around. They didn't have to do that at all. They had no interest. Yeah.
But also the well-rounded part of it is, I mean, in terms of where we are, no matter how you feel about Barack Obama, he didn't fight the Republicans on appointing a Supreme Court justice. He knew all about the Russian interference with the 2016 election and made a decision not to, blow that up. The FBI opened an investigation, reopened one on Hillary Clinton within the month of the election. So, I mean, there's a lot of like black swan events that led to this black swan presidency, and the media is definitely a culprit, but it's, it was amazing.
I was just on the subject of press and sort of social media coverage. There's been a bit of. I was over at the beginning of the year in Bangladesh doing election monitoring on their elections, and it was the physical stuff on polling day that I was looking at. But in advance of going, the Financial Times here in the UK had a very interesting article about the use of deep fakes and AI technology, which was being seen in the Bangladesh elections. and they were predicting that we can expect to see that in India and America and in the UK later in the year. So this is a kind of worrying trend as to how accurately can we believe the comments and clips we see. It's not just the editorial slant that somebody's putting on it. It could be completely and utterly fake, which is a very worrying trend coming into our democracies.
Oh yeah, and I mean, even before we got to the era of full-on deepfakes, a fundamental problem or a fundamental vulnerability that America had to someone like Trump is that by 2016, there was no longer a broadly accepted arbiter of truth. Like, people didn't trust the media writ large, in many cases for good reasons, because the major outlets in America are all privately owned corporate media. They don't, as was just called to mind by the example of them covering an empty podium of Donald Trump's rather than an actual ongoing speech by another candidate. They are motivated first and foremost by what brings them viewers. It's a long, long time since America had a respectable, genuinely impartial and journalistically dedicated, healthy media system. And at the same time, as the mainstream media has become sensationalist and somewhat untrustworthy, there is this whole other large and powerful right-wing American media ecosystem, which is where the vast majority of Republican primary voters and Republican voters in general go to get their news. So when you wonder, how can these people look at Donald Trump and consider voting for him after everything he's done? And the answer is that they don't know the same Donald Trump that you know, because they're not shown in the media that they consume all the time the same Donald Trump that you've been shown. And a big part of our problem in America, you pointed out in Scotland, there are any number of papers that are opposed to independence, a couple who are neutral, and one that is for. There is a massive and very powerful and very contained right-wing American media ecosystem running from Rupert Murdoch's newspapers up to Fox News, which is the largest cable news network and is, fairly well acknowledged at this point, a right-wing propaganda outlet. And there is no analogous, coherent, left-wing media ecosystem in the same way. So yeah, I think that the media has made America, the media system as it exists in America right now, made us vulnerable to Trump, gave him fuel early on, and then sustains a cultic movement on the Republican Party while it doesn't give the same sort of fuel to counterbalancing forces.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just watching what's happening in the chamber. We're still we're now in the minister, so the summing up is about to end and I'm going to have to run. So hopefully I can get back before the end of the show. But in case I don't, John, it's been good speaking to you. We'll still get a bit more questions in before the bells go here and I have to flee. But should I not get back before 9 o'clock, I'm just looking at Bert here. He just has to click that end stream button up the top there.
Excellent.
To close down the
Excellent.
And questions can be seen in live. They can be starred as things come up, and it's easy identifying the stars. So we've got a couple of questions here. Excellent. Before I go, and we'll be very grateful for John joining us tonight. We had originally hoped to have a different guest on to speak about the American elections, and we just wanted to pay a brief tribute. And I know Bert had sent some images. I'm just going to find the graphic that we've got, because we'd originally hoped to have Roy Heron on, who was a Democratic Party chair and senator in Tennessee. Unfortunately, Roy died in a tragic accident a few months ago and therefore couldn't be on the show. But we're very grateful for Bert for having arranged this, and we're very grateful for John for stepping in and filling the gap. And I know that you knew Roy, John. Would you like to say any words yourself?
Well, Roy was a client of mine for a few decades, and he was just he was a unique public servant. He was, very close to Al Gore and worked in all of Al Gore's campaigns, especially as a young man. And he was a Democrat, and he was a pastor and a politician, a writer and a thinker. And he was just a very unique and a very religious person, but in kind of a New Testament do good and forgive others, as opposed to a hard-edged sort of hateful form of religious politics that takes hold in some places. And he part of how I know Bert is, people around American politics like to help people get ahead and whatnot, and they kind of want to get credit for it but not do anything. And he called me one day and he said, I think so much of this young person. I want you to find an internship for him, and I want to and I'm going to underwrite it. Now, I've had a lot of people try to get me to hire people, thousands of them. I've never had anybody who really wanted to help and mentor somebody. And so that's just the sort of human he was. So.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Thanks. Would you like to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, everything.
I don't know if you knew that story, Bert. That
I didn't know that he had offered to underwrite it. I knew that he well, that was the kind of wonderful, loving man that he was. I mean, I first knew Roy because as someone who my mother adored. She was a close friend of his for many decades, and I sort of knew him as that charismatic uncle who you see once every couple of years. And then very fortunately, in my last few months before I moved to the UK, I went to work for him in Tennessee and lived in his house with his family. And I got to know him as the most relentlessly hardworking advocate of justice that I have ever known. I mean, and he did the kind of unsexy, thankless work that he really didn't have to do. As John said, he was a lawyer, he was a preacher, he was an eloquent and entertaining and charismatic man. He was the sort of man whose talents and education would have enabled him to be successful anywhere in the world that he wanted to go. But he chose to dedicate his whole working life to his little corner of Tennessee and then to his state. And even after he had spent decades in the uniquely thankless task of Tennessee Democrat, which you don't get any medals or cable news gigs for, he was still, when I knew him, working in this little town, often pro bono for little folks, just trying to make the world a little bit better, because he was driven by that sense of New Testament mission that John mentions. And I will always be grateful to have known him. And I know that his family and his community and everyone who knew him will feel his loss very greatly.
Could use more of him these days over here. So.
No, thank you very much. And as I say, we've got a few more questions. It's entertaining on this show because sometimes we end up having the guests take over when we have to flee to go and vote. And it's not the first time this has happened, so we have to give live instruction as we're sitting on air. So I'm just going to show Bert as we do the next question. We can alternate between the live questions, and the latest ones are at the bottom. And there's a comment there. I'll back that up.
On there, so we can see when to end.
We can star items, and the easiest way is to go to the starred ones to make sure we deal with the ones that actually are questions. And to show them on screen, we just click on here. I'll unstar that and we put it up. So Hashbury Stumble has asked, is there any prospect of an independent candidate running? What there are independents and other candidates running. What's your thoughts on their chances?
Well, there's an organization that's formally trying to do that, and is trying to put together a Democrat and a Republican to run, called No Labels. I don't see a credible campaign this time, and it's near impossible for the way our system works to just get ballot access in every state. The only way we'll see a successful independent candidacy is you need someone almost, like Trump or Oprah, who has a huge billion-dollar brand from something outside of politics, and then probably the ability to self-fund, because there is, a lot of people would like to see an independent, but to get through the process and be technically qualified for the ballot, it just takes a lot of money and patience and drive, and then with the shrinking middle that we talked about earlier, with only 10% ticket splitters. I think it also probably makes an independent candidacy a little less likely to be successful than, say, when Ross Perot ran in the 90s, or when Teddy Roosevelt ran in the 1900s. So
yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for that question, because we live in a chaotic and complicated world, and there are very few real certainties that we can cherish in life. And I can tell you with 100% absolute certainty that no independent candidate will be elected president in the United States anytime soon. It isn't just the reasons that you're thinking that it's, or like not you, John, you, the questioner. It isn't just the reasons that the questioner may be thinking that, it's hard for a new party to break the mold and break through. In American politics, the structure of things, the structure of our constitutional republic makes it uniquely difficult for someone, for a third party to break through. I mean, consider how difficult it is in British politics, the struggles of the Liberal Democrats over here, who have never really been able to quite break past the two-party mold, because not only does their support tend to be diffuse, but especially nowadays, when the two parties are so far apart. First of all, by being so far apart, they are going to, if you are a liberal or a conservative broadly, which is, the large majority of the United States is either liberal or conservative to some degree, then you're being served here. So you don't really need a third party candidate. And if you are even lean liberal or conservative, what an independent candidate is likely to do is to, the only thing that an independent candidate could do, and what no labels could do if they break through here, is take votes away from one side or the other and throw the election. And that is the real
play the spoiler. Yeah. Well, and if governors, senators are the proving ground for future presidents, I mean, we have almost no independents in the last 25 years that have been successful. I mean, 0.1% have been independents, and half of those got mad at their own party and switched. They didn't begin as independents. So I think it's almost no likelihood.
Yeah, there are 3 independents in the Senate right now who are, I believe, the only 3 in Congress, and one of them is Bernie Sanders. So he's on the far left of politics. You're not going to see him break through with a third party run. Right. Only one of them, that being Angus King, is in the way that people sort of imagine as a real folksy moderate who kind of crosses party lines. The other one, Kyrsten Sinema, is an independent because she's so horrifically unpopular with both parties that she is not even. She's currently looking at coming third in her race for re-election in her own home state, and quite a distant third. So I think that's emblematic, and she deserves it, in my opinion.
Good analogy.
Sorry.
It's a good analogy for how a presidential race could play out. So
yeah, I mean, in the best case scenario for a third party campaign, I think they could look to take, in a really unlikely best case scenario of a sort that hasn't happened for 3 decades, they could hope to take 10 to 15% of the vote and mess up one of the other parties. But I don't even think that's likely. I mean, if Teddy Roosevelt couldn't do it, Teddy Roosevelt, in the course of that campaign, when he was running for an independent for president as a third party candidate, not only had he been one of the most popular presidents in the history of the republic, and was he still a young, charismatic man, in the course of that election, he was shot by a would-be assassin during a campaign rally. And so formidable was he that he kept speaking for 3 full hours after the man had shot him, with the blood pouring down his shirt. That's the kind of epic figure that he was, and he still lost because he was a third party candidate. I mean, yeah, no, if Teddy Roosevelt can't do it, then Larry Hogan.
That is an argument for longer speeches, because he had his speech in his pocket and it was so thick it protected a more direct organ shot. But anyway.
I've spent the last number of years trying to get my speeches shorter and shorter so that everyone can listen to them in modern social media terms.
Short speeches kill you, sir.
Yeah, well, obviously, I'll need to pad them out a bit just for that. I'm now conscious of the time. We've got 10 minutes of the show left, which means if the division bell runs and it's 15 minutes for the first vote and then I'd have to vote the second one. I'm not going to get back before the end of the show. We might just get lucky. No, we're not. It's about to ring. So I'm going to hand over to Bert and just say thank you very much, John, for joining John and I tonight. We normally have a wee after chat, but we're not going to manage that tonight. But really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights. There's a few more questions that Bert can go through that have came in from our audience, and there may be a few others that get prompted in the last few minutes. But really appreciate you taking your time today to share your insights. And I can tell by the audience numbers that our people have been enjoying the show because it's kept solid everything going. So thank you very much. This is the madness of Westminster. It's not a fire alarm, it's a voting bell going. So I will now leg it as fast as I can to the chamber.
No problem. I'll be back as soon as I can. All right. Well, I can see, I'm looking over here. So it's just you and me now, John.
Okay.
I am looking over here at the some of the starred questions that have been asked, and I apologize. I assume you can hear that horrendous noise going on there.
That's kind of exciting. It's like this is live politics happening. So
exactly. I think it lends a certain flavor to a political podcast when the hosts have to jump up midway through to rush down for a later vote.
I like it.
Yeah. That hellish sound you can hear for the benefit of the listeners is the division bell, which rings all over the estate to let members know that it's their time to go and vote. It really is awful, but it'll be over in just a second. I'm looking at some of the questions here, and there are a couple. This is a slightly off topic, but it seems to be something that people want to know about. So there are a couple of people asking, what are, here I'll pull one up. What do you, as an experienced political operator, think about AIPAC? And I want you to talk a little bit about the influence of AIPAC and lobbyists in American elections, if you like.
Right. Well, it's fascinating what's going on in the United States right now. I mean, AIPAC is considered as effective as anyone at getting their message out to policymakers, and it's because they kind of put the time and resources and brain power into doing it. So they're pretty formidable politically. In the United States over the next 3 or 4 months, there's also going to be a number of Democratic primaries where you have some of the what we call the squad, some far left progressives that are very aligned with the Palestinian cause, and AIPAC's going to try to win primaries, and so they've had mixed success in the past, but they have they're incredibly effective with a lot of resources. So I think they will continue to be very effective. I think public opinion has a ways to flesh out, but I think the awareness around kind of the human side of the Palestinian cause in Gaza is there's a lot of awareness, but also there's this strange thing where some on the far left aren't distinguishing between Hamas and kind of more sympathetic humanitarian cause of a rank and file Palestinian. And so it's going to be we haven't seen this before in modern American politics. And so we're going to have some unanticipated consequences of it as well. And it may, there are Muslim groups that have been, and organizations threatening to sit down for President Biden against probably the most anti-Muslim president we've had in the last 100 years in the United States, Trump. So there's going to be a lot of moving chess pieces there. So
yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure that a horrendous and polarizing war in Israel and Gaza was not on President Biden's bingo card for the year. And this, in addition to being an appalling humanitarian crisis, to answer the person's question, I think the longer this goes on, the more problems it creates for Joe Biden. And I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, John. I mean, for his base, he has an incredibly difficult and delicate foreign policy situation to handle. And there are a lot of powerful interests in the United States I mean, like AIPAC, that are keen for him to take take a very strong pro-Israel line. There are also just a lot of voters in the country who feel a lot of deep sympathy with the horrendous deep sympathy for the horrendous trauma that was visited on Israel at the start of this. There are also a lot of, especially young progressives, who were the group already not well predisposed to Biden, who are paying a lot of attention to what's going on in Gaza and are uniquely unsympathetic with his attitude to it. I am going to be very interested to see in the primary races, excuse me, for some of those members of the squad, because they are getting strong challenges now. And a couple of them, like Rashida Tlaib and Cori Bush, as you said, John, have not always been careful to distinguish between support for the Palestinian people and tacit support for groups like Hamas. And I'll be interested to see, and AIPAC is going to be dumping money on those races, and it'll be interested to see how they fare. There's another question here, which I think, is something that is perplexing to a lot of outside people. Is it a surprise that the Hispanic vote is backing the Republican/Trump? So what are the numbers? For context, folks, the numbers here, and John may have more up-to-date things than me, but there have been some polls recently suggesting very high support for Trump among Hispanics and others. I do think some of that is inflated by effectively a measure of the right track, wrong track number that John was talking about earlier. But it should be noted that Donald Trump, despite launching his campaign with anti-Mexican bigotry, got a higher share of the votes from Hispanics and from people of color in general in 2020 than I believe any Republican in modern times. So yeah, do you have thoughts about this question?
Yeah, I mean, Hispanic voters don't have quite the party loyalty that, say, African-American voters do. So in some ways, it's not a surprise. I mean, when you think about some of the tactics Trump has used, I mean, I think you've got to look at it from the perspective of Hispanic Americans. They're not that driven by immigration, because most of the Hispanic Americans who vote are second, third, fourth generation. So they're a little removed from immigration issues directly impacting them. And so they're usually a lot more economically, kind of day in and day out, meat and potatoes, economic messages impact them. It's why, why Trump makes some inroads there. And I think it's a wake up call for Democrats to do a good job. And I think they're doing a lot to, have a strategy unlike any other in terms of engaging Hispanic voters, African-American voters, not to mention younger Black voters, older Black voters, younger Hispanic voters, older Latino voters. So, but to me, it's not surprising. I can see how it would be from afar, given some of the insensitive things Trump has said from day one.
Yeah. On that point, John, I wondered, because one of the problems for the listeners that we seem to be facing in America is that a lot of voters, while they might not like Trump personally, they associate the years of Trump's presidency with a really strong economy, relatively low taxes, and low unemployment. And they associate at least the early years of Biden's presidency mostly with high inflation. If you were running the Biden reelect campaign right now, well, first of all, what do you think of the Biden reelect campaign's messaging so far? And then if you were running their reelect campaign, what would be the central plank that you would be of your message that you would be pushing? I mean, I know it's a balance between, economy, democracy, abortion, etc. But
yeah,
what would you be most?
Well, I think just getting more aggressive about getting a message out. I mean, I think I'm a little concerned about how late they've gotten into campaign mode. I mean, some of the most vulnerable presidents running for re-election, the summer before, 18 months out, they really began their campaign in earnest. And so I just think using the big microphone of the White House, in addition to their campaign funding and a more of an advertising and campaign techniques that you would use in an electoral campaign, I just feel like they're starting a little late. And this the general election may be beginning in about 2 weeks, really, because, Trump has basically sewn up the nomination. So I think there's a lot of people, I'm not alone, wanting them to go earlier. I think one thing Democrats really struggle with is once they're in office, they shift and do a 180 into what they think is governing mode. But a big part of governing is communicating. I mean, from Franklin Roosevelt to John Kennedy to Ronald Reagan to everybody else, communicating is part of governing. And so I think owning some of these big accomplishments, he's gotten some of the biggest things done since the 60s, and really going out and selling those, because you've got an amazing poisonous undercurrent of saying things are the exact opposite of they really are. That the infrastructure bill isn't an infrastructure bill, and that he hasn't created any jobs. That even though the economic growth looks like this, they'll show a trend going like that. So I mean, there's a Alice in Wonderland meets 1984 sort of messaging, right-wing messaging, counter messaging that is undermining him at every step. He's got to be one of the most likable humans who's ever been a president of any country, and they've made him a thoroughly unlikable person based on polling with independents and Republicans. It's really been stunning what's happened to him.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, John. I mean, I've long thought that one of the main problems with the Obama administration, and as you say, Democrats in general, is that we seem to have a disdain for. We seem to feel that communication, that campaigning, that business of keeping people engaged and energized and letting them know how egregious your opponents are, that is distasteful, and that's not really what responsible folks do. And so they, like Obama did, go into technocrat mode as soon as they get in office and allow the other side to define the narrative.
Yeah, there's an old saying in American politics that Republicans try to do the wrong things in the right ways. Democrats try to do the right things, but in the wrong ways.
No, I think that's right. Well, and I think there's for some reason there seems to be a sense that it would be wrong or inappropriate to consider what would be the right or popular way to do it. When you anyway, for the benefits of listeners, the New Hampshire primary is tomorrow. The likely result of that is that Nikki Haley, who is the last Republican still in the race challenging Trump, she will likely lose. If she loses, it's over for her. Even if she wins, which is not likely, she will have won in the single most favorable state to her and the only one where she has organization, and will go on a few weeks later to face Trump in her own home state. And if she loses there, it's over. So in all likelihood, the general election will begin tomorrow night when she's defeated in New Hampshire. And in that case, we will discover whether the voters really have in these polls just been expressing that they didn't like Biden and they assumed the Republican nominee was going to be somebody else, but they didn't actually mean to vote for Trump, or whether they are prepared to return the Orange God King to power. On that sobering note, it is just gone 9 UK time, so I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you for all of the excellent probing questions from people who posted them. Thank you to our magnificent hosts, and thank you, John, for joining us today.
It was fun. Thanks a million.
No problem. Have a nice day. Goodbye, everybody.